They say a sister's love can break any curse. They don't tell you what that love costs. Elise had 11 brothers, beautiful, strong, princes who were beloved across the kingdom, until their stepmother, a witch who'd married their father for power, turned them into swans, cursed them to fly as birds by day, human only at night, slowly losing their humanity with each transformation. The witch offered Elise a choice. Speak one word and the curse becomes permanent, her brothers trapped as swans forever. Or stay silent, weave 11 shirts from stinging nettles that burn flesh to the bone, and break the curse. But she has to finish all 11 shirts before the brothers lose themselves completely to the animal mind. Before they forget they were ever human. Elise chose silence, chose pain, started weaving nettles with bleeding hands in a forest where people whispered she'd gone mad. That was 3 years ago. Now Elise's hands are ruined, scarred, twisted, barely functional. Her brothers land every evening, human for a few hours, but their eyes are more bird than boy now. They don't remember their names anymore, don't remember their father. Some nights they don't remember her. She's on the 11th shirt, almost done. Just a few more weeks of weaving, of silence, of watching her brothers slip away a little more each night. And the king's guards found her in the forest, silent, covered in scars, weaving something from plants that burned. They called her a witch, arrested her, sentenced her to burn at the stake for dark magic. And Elise can't speak to defend herself, can't explain, can't tell them that if she says one word, just one word, her brothers die as swans forever. The execution is in 3 days. The last shirt isn't finished, and her brothers are circling overhead, crying in voices that sound almost human, watching their sister about to burn because she loves them too much to speak. They say a sister's love can break any curse. They don't tell you it might kill her first. Subscribe and comment which fairy tale darkness you want exposed next. Elise's mother died when she was 7 years old. Her father remarried 2 years later, and that's when everything changed. The new queen was beautiful. Everyone said so. Hair like midnight, skin like porcelain, voice like honey. She smiled at official functions and said all the right things. But Elise saw something else in her stepmother's eyes when no one was watching. Something cold. Something hungry. Elise had 11 brothers. They were everything to her after their mother died. Henrik, the oldest at 20, down to Willem, the youngest at 12. They protected her, played with her, made sure she never felt alone, and they didn't like the new queen either. There's something wrong with her, Henrik said one night 2 months after the wedding. He was standing at Elise's bedroom window, watching the stepmother's tower across the courtyard. She doesn't eat at dinner. Father thinks she's delicate, but I've watched her. She's never hungry, never tired, never human. Don't be dramatic, their brother Marcus said. But his voice was uncertain. Elise pressed her face against the window. Her stepmother's tower was dark except for one window on the top floor. And in that window, Elise could see movement. Shadows that didn't match any human shape. What is she doing up there? Elise whispered. Nothing good, Henrik said. But father won't listen. He's enchanted. Literally, I think. He was right. Their father had changed since the marriage. He was distant now, distracted, spending all his time with the new queen and ignoring his children. When the brothers tried to warn him about her, he dismissed them. When Elise tried to show him strange things she'd found, herbs that smelled like rot, symbols carved into doors, dead birds arranged in patterns, he told her she was being dramatic. 3 months after the wedding, Elise made a mistake. She followed her stepmother one night. It was past midnight. Elise had woken to sounds coming from the courtyard, chanting in a language that made her teeth hurt to hear. She looked out her window and saw the queen walking toward her tower, holding something that glowed with sickly green light. Elise should have stayed in bed, should have pulled the covers over her head and pretended she'd seen nothing. But she was 14 and curious and terrified, and she needed to know what was happening in her home. She followed the queen up the tower stairs. The door at the top was ajar, light spilling out, that horrible chanting getting louder. Elise pressed herself against the wall and looked through the crack. The queen stood in the center of the room, surrounded by candles that burned with black flames. Her beautiful face was gone, replaced by something ancient and wrong. Skin stretched too tight over bones, eyes that were completely black, mouth full of too many teeth. She was holding a doll made from straw and blood, and as she chanted, the doll moved, twisted, screamed in a voice too small to be real. Elise gasped. The sound was tiny, barely audible over the chanting. The queen's head snapped around. Her real face, the monster face, stared directly at Elise, and she smiled with all those teeth. "Little princess," she said in a voice like breaking glass. "How long have you been watching?" Elise ran. Down the stairs, through the courtyard, toward her brother's wing of the palace. She was screaming for Henrik, for any of them, and they came running. All 11 brothers in their night clothes, confused and alarmed. "She's a witch," Elise gasped, grabbing Henrik's arm. "The queen. I saw her. She's not human. I'm right here," the queen said behind them. The queen stood in the courtyard, beautiful again. No trace of the monster Elise had just seen. She looked concerned, maternal even, as she walked toward them. "Poor child," she said softly. "You've been having nightmares again. Your father told me you struggle with them. Come, let's get you back to bed." "I'm not lying." Elise pulled away from her stepmother's reaching hand. "I saw you, in the tower, your real face, the magic." The queen's expression didn't change. "You saw me praying. I keep a private chapel in my tower. The candles, the incense. It must have looked strange to a young girl half asleep." "She's not lying," Henrik said. He stepped between Elise and the queen. "We've all seen strange things. We've all felt something wrong in this palace since you arrived." The queen looked at Henrik, really looked at him, and Elise saw something flicker across her beautiful face. Calculation, decision, rage carefully controlled. "I see," the queen said quietly. "So all of you believe your sister's delusions. All of you think I'm some kind of monster." "We think you're hiding something," Marcus said, and the other brothers nodded. The queen laughed. It sounded almost genuine, almost sad. "Your mother died 3 years ago. Your father was lonely. He married me. And now you..." She gestured at all of them. "You can't accept that someone new has taken her place, so you invent stories. You see monsters where there's only a woman trying to love a family that hates her. That's not..." Elise started. "Enough." The queen's voice cracked like a whip. "I have tried to be patient. I have tried to be kind, but you force my hand." She raised her arms, and the air went cold. Frost spread across the courtyard stones. The brothers tried to move, tried to reach for Elise, but they were frozen in place. "You want to see a monster?" the queen asked. Her face shifted, beauty peeling away like a mask, revealing the thing underneath. "Let me show you what monsters do to ungrateful children." She spoke words in that language that hurt to hear, and the brothers started screaming. It happened to Henrik first. He doubled over, his spine cracking, elongating. His arms bent backward, bones snapping and reforming. Feathers erupted from his skin like knives cutting through from the inside. His scream turned into something between human and animal. A cry that sounded like agony and terror and the death of everything he'd been. Then it spread to the others. All 11 brothers transforming at once. Bones breaking, bodies twisting. Human screams becoming bird cries. Elise watched, frozen by magic or horror, as her brothers became swans. White feathers soaked with blood. Eyes that were still human and terrified looking out from bird faces. The transformation took minutes. It felt like hours. By the end, 11 white swans stood where her brothers had been, some of them still making sounds that were almost human, all of them staring at Elise with eyes that begged for help she couldn't give. "There," the queen said, her monster face satisfied. "Much better. They wanted to fly away from their responsibilities. Now they can. Literally." "Change them back," Elise whispered. "Please, I'll do anything. Just change them back." The queen tilted her head. "Anything? What an interesting offer." She walked closer and Elise could smell rot and old magic. But why would I change them back? They called me a monster, accused me of evil. They deserve this. I'll tell Father. I'll show him what you are. Your father sees only what I want him to see. He's been under my spell since our wedding night. The Queen smiled. You could scream the truth from the palace walls, and no one would believe you. They'd think you'd gone mad with grief. Poor girl, losing her brothers like that. Such a tragedy. Then what do you want? Elise asked. Tears were streaming down her face, but her voice was steady. You cursed them for a reason. What's the price to break it? The Queen laughed. Oh, you think this is a negotiation? How precious. She circled Elise like a predator. But fine, let's play. There is a way to break the curse. Possibly, if you're strong enough. She gestured, and knowledge flooded into Elise's mind. Instructions, rules, impossible requirements. Elise gasped, fell to her knees, the information burning itself into her brain. 11 shirts, the Queen said. Woven from stinging nettles, the kind that burn human flesh on contact. You must weave them yourself, and you must remain absolutely silent from the moment you begin until the moment you finish. Not one word, not one sound. If you speak even once, the curse becomes permanent. Your brothers will be swans forever, and their human minds will die completely. Elise looked up at the Queen, her mind reeling from the instructions, from the impossibility of what was being asked. Why? She whispered. Why are you doing this? Because I can, the Queen said simply. Because your father chose you all over me. Because I'm tired of pretending to love children who aren't mine. Because watching you suffer will bring me joy. She leaned down, her monster face inches from Elise. And because I want to see if a sister's love is really as strong as the stories say. I want to see you try. I want to watch you fail. The swans, her brothers, were making distressed sounds, flapping their wings trying to reach Elise. But they couldn't. The curse kept them frozen where they stood. The curse is progressive, the Queen continued. They're human from sunset to sunrise. But each transformation takes more of who they were, their memories, their language, their humanity. You have maybe a year, 2 if you're lucky, before they forget they were ever human, before they become nothing but birds with human eyes. So you'd better weave fast. And the nettles? Elise's voice was barely audible. They burn flesh? Oh yes, terribly. Your hands will be destroyed within weeks, months at most. The pain will be constant, excruciating. But you'll keep weaving, won't you? Because you love them. Because you can't stand the thought of them suffering. The Queen's smile widened. That's the beautiful part. Your love will destroy you. Either you'll finish the shirts and be permanently scarred, or you'll break, speak, and lose them forever. Either way, I win. The Queen snapped her fingers. The spell broke. The swans launched into the air, crying out, circling above the courtyard, and Elise was alone with the monster wearing her stepmother's face. Clock's ticking, little princess, the Queen said. Every minute you waste is a minute they're losing themselves. Better get started. Then she was gone, disappeared like smoke. And Elise was left standing in the courtyard at 3 a.m, watching 11 white swans circle against the moon, knowing that with every passing second, her brothers were slipping away. She looked at her hands. They were small, soft, unmarked. In a few weeks, they'd be burned and scarred beyond recognition. In a few months, they might not work at all, but her brothers were swans, and the only way to save them was to weave 11 shirts from plants that would destroy her. Elise took a breath, made her choice. She went to her chambers, packed a bag with the few things she'd need, left a note for her father that she knew he wouldn't understand. The Queen's spell would make sure of that. And then she slipped out of the palace before dawn, heading toward the forest where nettles grew wild and the world wouldn't hear her screaming. The curse had begun. The race against time had started. And Elise had already decided. She'd rather have ruined hands and living brothers than perfect hands and brothers who'd forgotten they were human. She found the nettle patch at sunrise. The plants were everywhere, green and innocent-looking, swaying slightly in the morning breeze. Elise knelt before them, reached out with both hands, and grabbed a fistful. The pain was immediate, worse than she'd imagined. Like touching fire, like her skin was being flayed off, like every nerve in her hands was screaming at once. She bit her lip hard enough to draw blood, fighting the urge to scream, to let go, to give up before she'd even started. But she didn't let go. She pulled the nettles from the ground, filled her bag with them, and kept working even as her hands turned red and then white with blisters. Kept working even as tears streamed down her face. Kept working even as her brothers, still swans circling overhead, cried out in distress at what they were watching her do. By the time the sun set and her brothers landed in human form, Elise had gathered enough nettles to start the first shirt, and her hands looked like they'd been held over an open flame. "Elise," Henrik gasped, seeing her hands. He was human now, tall and whole in himself, but his eyes were different, sharper, more bird than boy. "What are you doing?" Elise opened her mouth to answer, to explain, to comfort him. Then she remembered. The curse. The rules. One word means permanent. She closed her mouth, shook her head, pointed at the nettles, at the bag, at her ruined hands, tried to communicate without words what she was doing, why she had to do it, how much time they had. "She told you, didn't she?" Henrik said, understanding dawning in those bird-sharp eyes. "The witch. She told you how to break the curse, and you can't speak or it becomes permanent." Elise nodded, tears still streaming down her face. "No," Henrik said. His voice cracked. "No, you can't. Look at your hands. Elise, you'll destroy yourself trying to save us." She met his eyes, shook her head firmly, pointed at him, at the other brothers who were landing around them, human but wrong, their movements too bird-like, their eyes too sharp. Pointed at the sky where they'd just been flying, mimed a swan, then a human, then shook her head, showing him that they were losing themselves. Henrik understood. They all did. And the grief on their faces, the knowledge that their sister was sacrificing herself to save them, was worse than any curse. "How long?" Marcus asked. His voice was hoarse, strange, less human than it should have been. "How long do we have?" Elise held up fingers. 1, maybe 2, 1 or 2 years before they forgot completely. "And how long will it take you to weave 11 shirts?" Elise didn't know. Weeks? Months? With hands that were already destroyed and getting worse? She shrugged helplessly. The brothers looked at each other, then at Elise, then at the pile of nettles that would save them and destroy their sister. "We'll help," Henrik said. "We're human from sunset to sunrise. We'll gather nettles for you. We'll keep watch. We'll do everything except the actual weaving. That has to be you, doesn't it?" Elise nodded. "Then we'll make it work," Henrik said, but his voice was hollow. Because they all knew the truth. Elise's hands wouldn't last long enough. The pain would break her, the silence would crack her, and they'd be watching her destroy herself day by day, unable to stop it. But she'd already started weaving, already begun the impossible task. And in 3 years, when her hands were twisted ruins and her brothers were more bird than boy, she'd still be weaving. Because that's what love costs. Everything. Always everything. 3 years. 1,095 days of silence. 26,280 hours of pain. Elise had stopped counting after the first 6 months. She lived in a cave now, deep in the forest where no one would find her. The brothers had helped her set it up during those early weeks when they were still mostly human, still remembered how to gather firewood, how to find clean water, how to think like people instead of birds. Now, 3 years later, they barely remembered how to stand upright. Elise sat cross-legged on the cave floor, weaving the 11th shirt. 10 completed shirts hung on the wall behind her, proof that she could do this, that the impossible was possible if you were willing to bleed for it. Her hands were ruins. The first month had been the worst. Blisters that burst and bled, skin that peeled away in strips, nerves exposed to open air. She'd wrapped them in cloth, but the cloth stuck to the wounds, and removing it every day was agony. By month 2, her hands were covered in scar tissue, thick, white, inflexible. By month 6, some of her fingers had stopped bending properly. By year 1, her hands looked like they belonged to something other than human. Now year 3, she couldn't fully extend any of her fingers. The scars had twisted them into permanent claws. 2 fingers on her left hand didn't have feeling anymore. The nerves burned away completely, and the pain was constant. A dull, throbbing ache that sharpened into agony whenever she touched the nettles. But she kept weaving. The 11th shirt was almost done. Just the sleeve left. Maybe 2 more weeks of work if her hands held out. Then she'd have all 11, and she could throw them over her brothers during a transformation, and the curse would break. If they lasted that long. Elise? She looked up. The sun was setting, which meant the brothers would be landing soon. But that voice, rough, barely human, struggling with human sounds, that was Willem, the youngest. 14 when he was cursed. 17 now, though he didn't remember his age anymore. Didn't remember much of anything. The swans landed one by one in the clearing outside the cave. The transformation happened at sunset, like always. Bones cracking back into human shape. Feathers dissolving. Bird bodies becoming boy bodies, naked and shivering in the cooling air. But they weren't boys anymore. Not really. Henrik had always been the leader. Strong, calm, protective. Now he crouched on all fours, his spine bent wrong, his eyes tracking movement like a predator. He'd tried to speak when he first landed, but all that came out was a clicking sound deep in his throat. Marcus was standing upright at least, but he was swaying, his balance wrong. He kept tilting his head sideways in that bird way, trying to see Elise better. When she made eye contact, he opened his mouth and made a sound that might have been her name but sounded more like a swan's cry. And Willem, God, Willem was the worst. He'd forgotten how to be human almost completely. He was crouched by the cave entrance, making soft cooing sounds, his hands moving like he was preening invisible feathers. His eyes were bright and sharp and empty of everything that had made him Willem. Food, Henrik managed to say. The word was slurred, barely recognizable. He'd been practicing, Elise knew, trying to hold on to language, but it was slipping away from all of them, syllable by syllable, day by day. Elise nodded and pointed to the berries and nuts the brothers had gathered yesterday, before they transformed into swans for the day. They'd gotten good at gathering food in the mornings before the transformation, leaving it for Elise so she could eat without stopping her weaving. The brothers ate like animals, fingers instead of hands, tearing instead of biting, making sounds of satisfaction that were more bird than human. Elise watched them and felt her heart breaking for the 1000th time. 2 more weeks. Just 2 more weeks and the shirt would be done. Then she could fix this. Then she could give them back their humanity before it was completely gone. Night fell. The brothers slept in piles like birds, pressed together for warmth, occasionally making sounds in their sleep, cries and clicks and whistles. Elise stayed awake, weaving by firelight, her ruined hands working through the pain. She'd learned to manage it over the years, learned which movements hurt least, learned how to position the nettles so they burned the already dead parts of her hands instead of the parts that still had feeling, learned to breathe through the worst of it. But tonight was bad. Her hands had been aching all day, a deep throb that suggested infection or worse. She'd pushed through it, but now, at midnight, the pain was sharp enough to make her vision blur. She set down the shirt, looked at her hands in the firelight. The left one was swollen. Red streaks ran from her knuckles up her wrist. Infection, definitely. One of the blisters on her palm had burst and wasn't healing properly. And her right hand, her dominant hand, 2 of the fingers were locked at wrong angles, permanently frozen. She'd been compensating by using her other fingers, but it was slowing her down. 2 more weeks. That's what she'd estimated. But looking at her hands now, she wasn't sure she had 2 weeks left in them. A sound made her look up. Henrik was awake, watching her with those bird-sharp eyes. He crawled closer, still couldn't walk properly anymore, and took her left hand gently in his own. He made a sound, distressed, worried, then looked at her face and said something that might have been, "Hurts." Elise nodded. "Yes, it hurts. It always hurts." Henrik held her hand like it was precious, like it was important. And for a moment, his eyes were human again. Really human, not just human-shaped. He remembered. He remembered being a brother, being Henrik, being someone who loved his sister and hated watching her suffer. Then the moment passed. His eyes went sharp and alien again. He let go of her hand and returned to the pile of sleeping brothers, curling up against Marcus, making soft sounds that weren't words. Elise picked up the shirt again, started weaving. Her hands screamed in protest, but she kept going. Because that moment, that flash of recognition in Henrik's eyes, that was what she was fighting for. That was why she couldn't stop. 2 weeks. Just 2 more weeks. The king's guards found her on a Tuesday morning. Elise was gathering nettles near the edge of the forest, always careful to stay hidden, always aware of how close she was to the kingdom's borders. But she'd gotten sloppy, desperate. The infection in her left hand was getting worse and she needed to finish the shirt before it spread, before her hands stopped working entirely. She didn't hear the guards approaching until it was too late. "There!" Elise spun around. 3 guards on horses, crossbows drawn. One of them was pointing at her. "The nettle thief! We've been tracking you for weeks." Nettle thief. Of course. She'd been taking nettles from the kingdom's land for 3 years. They'd finally noticed. Finally decided to do something about it. Elise dropped her basket and ran. She made it maybe 50 yards before she tripped. Fell hard. Her damaged hands couldn't catch her properly, and she hit the ground face first. Before she could get up, the guards were on her. "Don't move." They pulled her to her feet, and one of them gasped. "Look at her hands. What happened to her hands?" "Witchcraft," another guard said, his voice full of disgust. "She's been performing dark magic. Look, the nettles burn to touch. She must have cursed them somehow." "No," Elise wanted to scream. "I'm not a witch. I'm trying to save my brothers. Please, you have to let me finish." But she couldn't say any of that. Couldn't speak. One word meant her brothers stayed Swans forever. "She's not talking," the third guard said. "Silent witches are the worst. They're the ones who've sold their voices for power." They bound her hands, agony as the rope pressed against infected flesh, and threw her onto a horse, started leading her toward the capital. Elise looked back desperately. The cave was a mile away. Her brothers were there, would wake as swans when the sun rose, would realize she was gone. The 10 completed shirts were there, and the 11th, almost done, was lying on the cave floor where she'd left it. 2 weeks, she'd been 2 weeks away from finishing. Now she was being dragged to a kingdom that thought she was a witch. And she couldn't speak to defend herself. Couldn't explain. Couldn't do anything except watch as years of suffering were about to become worthless. They reached the capital by evening. Threw her in a cell. A priest came to examine her for marks of dark magic and recoiled at the sight of her hands. "Corruption," he said. "She's been handling cursed materials. Those scars are punishment from dark forces." "She was weaving something," one of the guards reported. "We found her cave. There are shirts made from those burning plants, and bones. Human-sized bones arranged in circles. Not bones. Her brothers, sleeping in human form. But the guards didn't know that. Didn't know they'd just interrupted a curse-breaking, destroyed 3 years of work, and condemned 11 princes to spend the rest of their lives as swans. The trial was set for 3 days from now. Execution by burning, the standard punishment for witchcraft. Elise sat in her cell, staring at her ruined hands, and felt something break inside her that had nothing to do with curse or pain or sacrifice. 3 days. She had 3 days to finish a sleeve that would take 2 weeks to complete, with hands that barely worked. In a cell with no nettles. While her brothers flew outside the prison tower, crying in voices that were almost human, not understanding why their sister had been taken from them. The curse was going to win. The Witch Queen was going to win. And Elise was going to burn while her brothers lost themselves to bird mines, never knowing that she'd tried. that she'd almost succeeded, that she'd been 2 weeks away from saving them. She looked up at the narrow window of her cell, saw 11 white shapes circling against the evening sky, heard their cries, distressed, confused, looking for her, and Elise made a decision. If she was going to burn in 3 days, then she'd spend those 3 days trying. She'd beg for the shirts to be brought to her. She'd weave until her hands gave out completely. She'd race death and curse and impossible odds, and maybe she'd finish in time. Or maybe she'd die trying, but at least she'd die still fighting. 2 guards appeared at her cell door. "The king wants to see you," one said. "Apparently he's curious about the silent witch who works with fire plants." They unlocked her cell and led her upstairs, through hallways, to a throne room where a young king sat watching her with eyes that looked more curious than cruel. "You're young," he said. "Younger than I expected. What's your name?" Elise stared at him, couldn't answer, needed to stay silent. "She won't talk," the guard said. "Silent witches never do." "Or maybe she's mute," the king said. He stood, walked closer, studied her face. "You're not a witch, are you?" "There's something else happening here, something I don't understand." He was right. He didn't understand. But Elise couldn't explain. Could only stand there, hands bound, infection spreading, brothers circling outside, and hope that somehow, impossibly, this king would believe a truth she couldn't speak. The king's name was Aldrich. He was 24 years old, had been king for 2 years, and he didn't believe in executing people without understanding why. "Bring me the evidence," he told his guards. "Everything you found in her cave." They brought the 10 completed shirts, laid them out on the throne room floor, and Aldrich stared at them with an expression that shifted from confusion to horror to something like awe. "These are made from nettles," he said, touching one carefully. Even dormant, the nettle fibers stung his fingers. He pulled back. "But they're woven so precisely, so perfectly. This would take months, years." He looked at Elise, at her destroyed hands, at the scars that covered every inch of skin from fingertip to wrist. "You made these," he said. "It wasn't a question. With your bare hands. For 3 years you wove burning plants into shirts and you destroyed yourself doing it." He paused. "Why?" Elise opened her mouth, closed it. The frustration must have shown on her face because Aldrich's expression softened. "You can't speak," he said, "or you won't. There's a difference." He thought for a moment. "Can you write?" Elise's heart leapt. Yes, she could write. She nodded frantically. Aldrich gestured to a servant. "Bring parchment and ink, and untie her hands, carefully." The guards untied her. Elise's hands were so swollen and damaged that she couldn't hold the quill properly. It took 3 tries, her fingers shaking, infection making every movement agony. But finally, she managed to scratch out words. "Brothers cursed, swans. Shirts break curse. Can't speak or curse permanent, please let me finish." She pushed the parchment toward Aldrich, watched his face as he read it. Watched him process what she'd written, watched disbelief war with something else. Maybe hope, maybe possibility. "Your brothers are cursed?" he said slowly. "The swans circling outside, those are your brothers?" Elise nodded desperately. "And these shirts will break the curse, but only if you finish all of them without speaking." Another nod. Aldrich looked at the 10 completed shirts, then at the guards. "You said there were 11 young men in the cave when you found it." "Yes, Your Majesty, but they scattered like animals when we entered. We thought they were accomplices." "They were swans," Aldrich said. "During the day they're swans. At night they're human. That's the curse." He looked at Elise. "How many brothers?" She held up 11 fingers. 11 brothers, 10 completed shirts, 1 still unfinished. Aldrich stood. "Where's the 11th shirt?" "Still in the cave, Your Majesty," a guard said. "We left it. It was incomplete. Didn't seem like evidence." "Bring it here," Aldrich commanded. "Now. And bring more nettles, as many as you can find." He turned to Elise. "You have 3 days until your execution. I can't cancel it without proof of your story, but I can give you materials and time. If you finish the shirt and break the curse before you're scheduled to burn, I'll believe you. I'll pardon you. 3 days. The sleeve would take 2 weeks if her hands were healthy. 3 days was impossible. But Elise nodded anyway, because impossible was all she had left. They brought her the 11th shirt that evening, set up a workstation in her cell, table, chair, lamp, and a basket of fresh nettles that burned even through the leather gloves the guards wore. Elise picked up the nettles with her bare, ruined hands. The pain was immediate and excruciating. But she was used to pain. Had been living with it for 3 years. What was 3 more days? She started weaving. Midnight came and went. Her hands screamed in protest. The infection was spreading, red lines creeping up her wrists now, fever making her head swim. But she kept weaving. 1 stitch. Then another. At sunset, she heard cries outside her cell window. The brothers, transforming. 11 swans becoming 11 young men, landing on the prison tower, trying to reach her. A guard came to her cell. "Your Majesty, there are naked men climbing the tower. They're making inhuman sounds and trying to break into the prison. Let them in," Aldrich said. He'd been watching Elise weave for hours, fascinated and horrified. She said they're her brothers. Let's see if she's telling the truth. They opened a door to the tower. The brothers stumbled in, 11 young men who barely remembered how to be human, covered in dirt and scars, moving more like birds than boys. Henrik was in front. He saw Elise and made a sound. Distress, relief, confusion. He tried to speak, managed something that might have been her name, but mostly just sounded like animal sounds. Aldrich stared at them, at the way they moved, at their sharp alien eyes, at how Willem was crouched on the floor trying to preen Elise's hair with his teeth. "They're cursed," Aldrich whispered. "You weren't lying. They're really cursed." Elise nodded, tears streaming down her face. She pointed at the brothers, then at the incomplete shirt, then at herself. Showed him the timeline. Finish the shirt, break the curse, save her brothers. "How long until they forget completely?" Aldrich asked. Elise held up fingers. Days. Maybe a week. They were so close to losing themselves forever. "Then we'll help," Aldrich decided. He turned to the guards. "Bring more light, more nettles, food and water. The lady is going to work through the night, and we're going to make sure she has what she needs." The brothers stayed in the cell that night, watched Elise weave. Henrik tried to help at first, tried to hold the nettles for her, but even in human form, his mind was too bird-like now. He couldn't understand the pattern, couldn't follow instructions. So he just sat beside her, occasionally making sounds that might have been encouragement. Elise wove, all night, all the next day, all the next night. Her hands were beyond ruined now. 3 fingers on her left hand weren't working at all. The infection had spread past her wrists, up her forearms. Fever made everything blur, but she kept going, because the alternative was burning while her brothers watched. Day 3 arrived, execution day. The shirt still wasn't finished. She needed maybe 6 more hours of work, but they came to collect her at noon. "No," Aldrich said when the executioners arrived. "Give her more time." "Your Majesty, the execution is scheduled. The crowds have gathered. If you delay without reason, they'll think you're weak." "I don't care what they think." "Your Majesty, please. The law is clear. She was caught performing witchcraft. The sentence is death." Aldrich looked at Elise, at her ruined hands, her fevered face, the incomplete shirt in her lap. At the brothers who were starting to become swans again as the sun rose, bones cracking, bodies changing, humanity slipping away. "Take her to the stake," he said finally. "But let her bring the shirt. Let her keep weaving until the moment the fire is lit." So they dragged Elise to the courtyard, where a crowd had gathered to watch a witch burn. They tied her to the stake, wood piled around her feet, and they let her keep the shirt, let her keep weaving even as the executioner prepared the torch. Her brothers were circling overhead, 11 white swans making sounds that were almost human, diving toward her, unable to help. Elise wove. Her hands were barely responding now. The infection had spread to her shoulders. She could feel her body shutting down, fever consuming her. But the sleeve was almost done. Just a few more inches. Just a little more time. "Light the fire," the executioner said. "Wait," Aldrich commanded. "Give her 1 more minute." Elise's fingers were shaking so badly she could barely hold the nettles. The last few stitches. Just the last few stitches and the sleeve would be complete. The executioner lowered his torch toward the wood. Elise finished the final stitch. Held up the completed shirt. All of it. Both sleeves. Perfect despite everything. And 11 swans dove from the sky. Elise threw the shirts. 1, 2, 3, 4. She threw them at her diving brothers. Watched the fabric connect with feathers. Watched the transformation begin. But she'd thrown them wrong. Miscalculated in her fevered state. 10 shirts landed perfectly. 10 brothers transformed mid-flight. Bones cracking back to human. Feathers dissolving. Boys where swans had been. But the 11th shirt, Willem's shirt, only caught his left side. The sleeve she'd just finished missed his arm entirely. The transformation was incomplete. 10 brothers landed on the courtyard stones as humans, naked, whole, themselves again. Henrik was crying, Marcus was laughing, the others were shouting in voices that were finally human again. But Willem, the youngest, the one who'd lost himself most completely, he landed half transformed. His body was human, his face was human, but his left arm was still a wing. White feathers, bird bone, a swan's appendage where a boy's arm should have been. The incomplete shirt had broken the curse, but not perfectly, not completely. "Willem," Elise tried to say, but her voice was gone. 3 years of silence had damaged her vocal cords. What came out was barely a whisper, rough and broken. She tried again. I'm so sorry, I almost finished, Her voice cracked. Failed. After 3 years of silence, after keeping her voice locked away to save them, it was ruined. Maybe permanently. But she'd spoken. The curse was broken, and her brothers were alive. The crowd was silent, staring at 11 naked young men who'd just appeared from nowhere, one of them with a swan's wing for an arm, staring at the girl tied to the stake with hands that looked like they'd been held in fire. Aldrich stepped forward. "Untie her. Now." They untied Elise. She collapsed immediately, fever and exhaustion and 3 years of pain finally catching up with her. Henrik caught her, held her carefully, tears streaming down his face. "You did it," he said. His voice was hoarse, unused, but it was his voice, human and whole and real. "You saved us. You actually saved us." Elise tried to smile, tried to speak, but her voice was gone, her hands were ruined, her body was shutting down. She'd saved her brothers. But the price had been everything. "Get the physician," Aldrich commanded. "Now, save her. I don't care what it costs." They carried Elise to the palace. The physicians worked for 3 days to break the fever, to treat the infection, to save what they could of her hands. She survived, but barely. When she finally woke a week later, her hands were wrapped in bandages. Henrik was sitting beside her bed, and Willem, sweet Willem, 14 when he was cursed, 17 now, was asleep in a chair, his left wing folded awkwardly against his chest. "He's stuck like that," Henrik said quietly when he saw Elise looking. The incomplete shirt broke the curse but left him half-changed. "The physicians say it's permanent." Elise tried to speak, tried to apologize, but her voice was still broken. Only managed a whisper that hurt her throat. "Don't," Henrik said. "Don't apologize. You saved us. All of us. Willem knows that. He's alive. He's human. He has 1 wing instead of 2 arms, but he's not a swan anymore. He remembers who he is. That's because of you." The door opened. Aldrich entered, looking tired and relieved when he saw Elise awake. "Your brothers have told me everything," he said. "About the curse. About the witch who married your father. About your sacrifice." He sat beside her bed. "I've sent guards to your kingdom. Your father has been freed from the witch's spell. She disappeared the moment the curse broke, and your brothers are home now. Safe." Elise tried to ask about her hands, about her voice. "Your voice will heal," Aldrich said gently. "The physicians say it will take months, maybe years. It might never be the same. And your hands?" He paused. "They're permanently damaged. Some function will return, but you'll never have full use of them again. The scarring is too severe." So that was the price. Her voice damaged, her hands ruined. 3 years of her life spent in a forest, suffering in silence, watching her brothers lose themselves piece by piece. But they were alive. They were human. They were free. Henrik took her bandaged hand carefully. "Thank you," he said, "for everything. For not giving up. For choosing us." Elise tried to smile, managed a small one. Because that's what love costs. That's what saving people you love requires. Sacrifice, pain, everything you have and everything you are. The curse was broken, but nobody walked away from it whole. 10 brothers were perfectly healed. Willem would live the rest of his life with a swan's wing for a left arm, a permanent reminder of the curse, of the incomplete salvation, of how close they'd come to being lost forever. And Elise would live with ruined hands and a damaged voice, with scars that would never fade, with the memory of 3 years of pain etched into her body and mind. But when she looked at her brothers, alive, human, themselves again, she knew she'd make the same choice. Every time, forever. That's what love is. That's what it costs. That's what it means to save someone. Everything. Always. Everything. Elise stayed in King Aldrich's palace for 3 months while she recovered. The physicians did what they could. Wrapped her hands, gave her medicine for the pain, taught her exercises to regain some function. But the damage was permanent. Her hands would always be scarred, twisted, limited. And her voice, though it returned, was never the same. Rough, raspy, like something had been broken inside her throat that couldn't be fixed. Her brothers visited her every day. All 11 of them, staying in the palace as Aldrich's guests while Elise healed. They'd tell her stories about remembering, how it felt to wake up human and whole, to have thoughts that were words instead of instincts, to remember their own names. All except the youngest brother, who'd lost himself most completely to the curse, who'd been saved at the last possible moment with an incomplete shirt. Willem was quieter than the others. He'd sit in Elise's room with his wing folded against his body, and sometimes she'd catch him staring at it with an expression she couldn't read. "Does it hurt?" she asked him one day, her damaged voice making the words rough. Willem touched the wing. White feathers, bird bone, beautiful and wrong. "No," he said, "but it feels like I'm still partially cursed, like I'm stuck between 2 worlds." "I'm sorry," Elise whispered. "I was so close. If I'd had just a few more hours." "Stop." Willem's voice was firm. "I'm alive, I'm human. I remember who I am. That's because of you." He looked at her with eyes that were completely human now, no trace of bird mind left. "I'd rather have 1 wing in my humanity than 2 arms and a bird's brain. You gave me that choice, you gave me myself back." But Elise saw the way people stared at Willem when they walked through town. Saw the fear, the fascination, the whispers about the boy with a swan's wing. Saw how he couldn't do things his brothers could. Couldn't hold things properly. Couldn't embrace people with both arms. Couldn't forget for even a moment that he was different. The incomplete curse had marked him forever, just as it had marked her. Aldrich proposed to her 3 months after the curse broke. "I've watched you sacrifice everything for the people you love," he said. "I've watched you endure unimaginable pain without breaking. I've never met anyone stronger." He took her scarred hands gently. "I know your voice is damaged. I know your hands will never fully heal. But I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to be mine." Elise stared at him. At this king who'd believed her when no one else would, who'd given her time to finish the shirt even when it meant defying his own laws, who'd spent 3 months helping her heal without asking for anything in return. She said yes. In her rough, damaged voice, she said yes. They married in the spring. All 11 brothers attended. Henrik walked Elise down the aisle since their father was still recovering from the witch's spell, and Willem stood beside them, his wing carefully folded, wearing a specially made jacket that accommodated his unique shape. Elise became a queen, ruled beside Aldrich for 30 years, had 3 children who loved their aunt and uncles, who grew up hearing the story of the curse and the nettles and the sister who destroyed herself to save her brothers. But her hands never healed. Every time she picked up a cup, wrote a letter, touched her children's faces, she was reminded of the 3 years she'd spent weaving burning plants into shirts. The pain faded over time, became manageable, but the scars stayed, the twisted fingers stayed, the permanent damage stayed, and her voice, though functional, never sounded the same. It was rough, raspy, and it hurt to talk for long periods. She'd given 3 years of silence to save her brothers, and even after breaking the curse, her voice never fully returned. But she didn't regret it. Not once. Not even on the days when her hands ached so badly she couldn't hold anything. Not even when she lost her voice entirely during bad winters and had to communicate in writing for weeks at a time. Because her brothers were alive, human, free. Willem lived in the palace, became a scholar since physical labor was difficult with one arm. He wrote books about curses and transformations, about the nature of sacrifice and incomplete magic. He never married, said he couldn't ask someone to love a man who was part swan, but he found purpose, found happiness, found a life that mattered. The other 10 brothers thrived. Henrik became a general, Marcus a diplomat. They had families, careers, lives that wouldn't have existed if Elise hadn't chosen pain over silence, sacrifice over safety. And every year, on the anniversary of the curse breaking, all 11 brothers would gather at Elise's palace. They'd look at her ruined hands and Willem's swan wing and remember the price that was paid for their freedom. Was it worth it? Someone asked Willem once during one of these anniversary dinners. Living with that wing for the rest of your life? Willem looked at Elise, at his sister who'd destroyed herself to save him, at the woman who'd chosen 3 years of agony so he could have a lifetime of humanity. Every single day, he said, I'd take 1,000 wings if it meant keeping my mind, keeping myself. Elise smiled. Her damaged voice whispered, Me too, because that's what love costs. That's what saving people requires. Hands that will never work properly. A voice that will never sound the same. 3 years of silence and pain, and watching the people you love slip away piece by piece while you race to save them. But also this: brothers who are alive. Children who grow up knowing their family is whole. A kingdom that tells the story of the girl who sacrificed everything and asks nothing in return. The fairy tale ended. But the scars didn't. Elise lived to be 73 years old, and even on her deathbed, her hands were twisted and her voice was rough. The price of breaking the curse never faded, never healed, never went away. But when her brothers gathered around her in those final hours, all 11 of them, including Willem with his swan wing, all alive and human and themselves because of her, Elise had no regrets. Would you do it again? Henrik asked her, his voice breaking. Knowing what it would cost? Elise looked at him with eyes that were still sharp, still certain, and in her rough, damaged voice she whispered her final words. Every time. I'd choose you every time. That's what love is. That's what it costs. That's what it means to save someone. Everything. Always everything. And somehow, despite the pain, despite the scars, despite the permanent damage, it's always worth it. That's Elise's story. That's what it costs to break a curse. That's what sacrifice really means. Not a moment of pain, but years of it. Not temporary damage, but permanent scars. Not a dramatic gesture, but a quiet, constant choice to keep going, even when your body is screaming at you to stop. If this story hit you differently than traditional fairy tales, if you saw the real price of happily ever after, hit that subscribe button. We've got more dark fairy tale retellings where the heroes pay real costs, where love requires real sacrifice, where the happy ending comes with scars that never fade. Drop a comment and tell us, would you do what Elise did? Would you destroy your hands and voice to save your siblings? Or better yet, tell us which fairy tale you want us to expose next. What childhood story needs the brutal truth treatment? Because here at Sinister Stories, we know that fairy tales aren't gentle. They're not simple. They're warnings about the prices we pay for love, for loyalty, for family. They're reminders that saving people costs something. Not just time or effort, but pieces of yourself that you never get back. Elise saved 11 brothers, but she lost her hands, her voice, 3 years of her life. And Willem, sweet Willem, he spent the rest of his life with a swan's wing because she was 6 hours short of finishing the last sleeve. That's not failure. That's reality. That's what love looks like when you actually have to fight for it. Subscribe, comment, and remember, the next time you read a fairy tale about someone breaking a curse or saving their family, ask yourself what it really cost them. Ask yourself what scars they carried for the rest of their lives. Ask yourself if you'd pay that price, because the answer tells you everything about what love really means and how much you're willing to give to save the people you love. Everything. Always everything. Even when it destroys you. Especially when it destroys you. That's the truth of fairy tales. That's the darkness hiding in the happily ever after. That's what we're here to show you.